London still surprises me. Even after living here for 3 years and coming back frequently ever since, I keep discovering places I had never noticed before. That's what I love about this city. You can walk the same streets for years and still miss what's hiding just a few steps away. This is part 2 of my London Hidden Places series. 9 more spots that most tourists don't plan for or don't even know exist. Let's go. Abney Park Cemetery, Stoke Newington. Abney Park isn't just a park. It's one of London's oldest garden cemeteries. The graves here date back mainly to the 18th and 19th centuries, and many of the people buried here were writers, activists, and important figures from Victorian London. Over time, nature completely took over. Trees grew around headstones, paths disappeared, and it became this strange mix of history and overgrown forest. It's also been used as a filming location, including Amy Winehouse's Back to Black era visuals, which adds another layer of cultural history to the place. It feels raw, real, and untouched, not curated for tourists. From quiet history to one of the best long walks in the city. Canal Walk, Paddington to Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. This is one of my favorite ways to move through London. You can walk along the canal from Paddington all the way through Little Venice, past Regent's Canal, through Camden, and eventually reach Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. The best part? It never feels like you're in central London. You pass houseboats, waterside cafes, small coffee spots, cyclists, locals walking dogs, real city life. It's flat, peaceful, and way more interesting than taking the tube. And if you like raw street energy, this next one hits differently. Leake Street Graffiti Tunnel. Right under Waterloo Station is Leake Street, London's most famous legal graffiti tunnel. Artists from all over the world come here to paint, repaint, and paint over each other. That means it's never the same twice. You'll smell spray paint, hear music, see people working on fresh pieces in real time. It's messy, loud, and completely alive. This is street culture, not a museum. Let's switch the mood completely. Kyoto Garden, Holland Park. Kyoto Garden feels like it belongs in a different country. It was gifted to London by the city of Kyoto in Japan, and it's designed exactly like a traditional Japanese garden. Waterfalls, koi fish, stone paths, and perfectly placed trees. It's quiet, calm, and surprisingly strict. People actually lower their voices here, a full mental reset in the middle of West London. Staying by the water, but this time in a very different way. Little Venice. Little Venice is where the canals open up and slow everything down. You've got narrow boats, cafes by the water, people sitting with coffees, and almost no traffic noise. It doesn't feel busy, even though you're close to Paddington. It's one of those places people stumble into and immediately say, "Wait, this is London?" Now let's head south to a spot almost no tourists ever reach. Millwall Outer Crescent. Millwall Outer Crescent is one of the most unusual riverside walks in London. It sits on the Isle of Dogs, right next to Canary Wharf, but it feels completely disconnected from it. You're walking along a curved stretch of the Thames with uninterrupted views of the city skyline. It's quiet, local, and feels like a secret shortcut only residents know about. From wide open space to something incredibly narrow. The Narrowest House in London. Tucked between 2 normal buildings is what's often called London's narrowest house. It's barely wider than a front door, and most people walk past it without even noticing. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's a perfect example of how weird and clever London architecture can be. Let's add some color. Neal's Yard, Covent Garden. Neal's Yard is hidden just seconds away from one of the busiest areas in London. Bright buildings, independent cafes, organic food spots, all packed into a tiny courtyard. It's colorful, creative, and feels like a mini village inside the city. Tourists usually miss it completely, even though they're right next to it. Last stop, and it's a dramatic one. St. Dunstan-In-The-East. St. Dunstan-In-The-East is a ruined church turned public garden. The original church dates back to medieval times, and after being heavily damaged during World War II, it was left as a ruin. Instead of rebuilding it, the city turned it into a green space. You've got stone walls, Gothic windows, vines climbing through arches, all right next to the financial district. It's quiet, emotional, and feels frozen in time. This is the London I fell in love with. Not just landmarks, but layers. History, culture, weird details, quiet corners, and stories hiding in plain sight. This was part 2 of my London Hidden Places series, and honestly, the list could keep going on forever.